2023 was a bit bumpy for sustainable investments with surprising performance and much debate. So what do we expect for SI in 2024? Also, what is the future of this ongoing ESG backlash, the impact of falling interest rates, upcoming elections, and what are top themes to watch this year? We're going to break it all down for you right now on UBS Trending. Hi, everybody, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm Anthony Pastore. Thanks for joining us. Amantia Muhedini and Michelle Liberty are back in the studio with me. We're going to be talking about CIO's 2024 outlook for sustainable investing. And Amantia, looking back at 2023, it was a really interesting year across the board for the markets, but particularly when it comes to SI. Performance challenges, there were a lot of bright spots, there were some regulation changes, there were some severe weather events. I mean, you name it, you saw the gamut when it came to everything that we talk about within SI. So what are some of the top questions that you're getting when you're looking at 2024 as we're here in the new year? What are you talking about with our clients, our advisors?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Anthony. And look, I mean, we're at the start of 2024. We just published our outlook for sustainable investments in particular, and we're driving our views here around these core questions that the market is asking. So the first one, I think you named it, is we saw a lot of conversation around the three-letter word ESG. There was some backlash in some states in the U.S. There was a lot of support in others, and globally there's a lot of regulation as well. So our core question here is, what will happen there? What will investment flows look like as we move into 24? And I'll just say in 23, there was a lot of resilience globally in sustainable investing funds and flows. So that's just worth noting. Now, a second question is, what does sustainable investing evolve to? What are these strategies defined as? What are regulators guiding us towards? Again, thinking about the global landscape. Number three, this has been a time of fixed income, paying attention to fixed income in portfolios. So what will that look like for labeled sustainable bonds, issuance performance, and so forth? And now, those are big questions around sustainable investing. We're also looking very concretely at the macro backdrop. So question number four is, what is the impact here of elections as we're moving into this big electoral focus year for sustainable investing? So additionally, we're also looking at falling interest rates. What does it mean for performance? And then finally, 5 questions plus a sixth one, which is, what are the themes to watch? Where should we actually be positioned given all of that? So lots of questions. We do have some answers as well.
Okay, good. It's always good to get some answers, right? Is there one particular theme that you're watching out for, though, when you talk about those themes for the year?
Look, I mean, we'll talk more about themes. I think we're looking at a shift away from just a narrow focus on the energy transition to a broader area. But I'll say lots of questions that I mentioned. There will be continued noise. We expect this year, really investors should focus on the question around the impact of interest rates, because from a fundamental perspective, that should drive more corporate investment as well as expectations on performance. Questions around the elections, ESG, and so forth. Maybe some of that will kind of blow out over the medium term.
Right, and I imagine that anybody listening to watching this right now is not surprised by the themes you just mentioned. They're pretty much ongoing and what you'd expect when you were talking about sustainable investing this year. And Michelle, that kind of brings me to, there's certainly a lot to cover there with what Amantia talked about. But elections are, I mean, we are in an election year in the U.S. It's going to be, they always say it's the most important election of your lifetime. I think this one is certainly, going to be categorized as so. But when it comes to SI, what are you looking for when it comes to the conversations? What do you expect to see on the campaign trail until we get to November election day in the U.S.?
Yeah, sure, Anthony. And I would say it's not just the U.S. too, right? It's actually countries that represent over half of global GDP that have elections this year. So it's certainly something we're going to be hearing about from the investment community. Now, that's not to say that we think you should make a bet in your portfolio on these elections, because, for instance, in the U.S., we actually haven't seen broad market impact historically that's long-lasting on the back of an election. Now, that said, I do see some sources of headline risk. If you think about the current fiscal situation in the U.S., I think it's pretty likely we're going to hear rhetoric on the campaign trail about where to cut spending, right? So I think on the back of that, we're probably going to start to hear a little bit more about what is the potential for repealing the Inflation Reduction Act. I would be clear here that it's not impossible to do, right? It's not at all completely impossible, but I think when it comes to it, we'll probably see a little bit more nuance. There's always political deals to be struck, right? So it's probably more likely that we would see parts of it repealed rather than the entire bill itself. But that said, I don't think we'll hear that nuance on the campaign trail, right? It's just going to be about where can we cut spending and what does that mean for the companies that are seen as most exposed. So companies exposed to EVs, renewable energy, for example. And that's why, I know you asked earlier, what themes are in focus. That's part of the reason that we like infrastructure right now, because it looks a little bit more insulated from that spending rhetoric, because critical infrastructure is so critical to national security.
Right, of course.
And for that reason, it's a little bit more bipartisan.
And it's interesting when you talk about the individual companies, which we won't mention here, there are a lot that came out specifically and committed themselves to reducing their carbon footprint. And a lot of car makers have said we're committed to adding more EVs to our fleet in a certain period of time. So there's a lot more than just what Congress or what the future president might actually say and what kind of bills might be passed. There's a lot of capital, or I should say within the capitalism kind of umbrella under that is going to dictate a lot of what might go on. But, let's take it outside the U.S. As you said, there are plenty of other elections happening. India, the European Union. Potentially, what do you see as far as maybe impacting investments within SI, or is it too soon to tell?
Well, I think it's similar in the sense that it's just another source of uncertainty, right? Anytime you have an election anywhere, it's a source of political uncertainty and uncertainty around what some of these spending changes could look like. And in June, we will see the European Union go to elect a new parliament. From what we're seeing in the Netherlands and also just looking at polling in Germany, it looks like migration could be a focus. So I think it becomes a matter of priorities, right, and where climate spending will fall in that list of priorities. So we don't expect the EU to completely abandon some of its large plans that it's put out there, like Repower EU, Fit for 55, and others. But again, it's a source of uncertainty. At the end of the day, it's the macro environment that's really going to drive performance, right? But again, it's another source of headline risk.
And I think, saying, sort of beware headline risk, you sort of mentioned that in your previous response. I think that's something that all investors should be thinking about. And also talk to your financial advisor before you make any hasty decisions. But Amantia, as we're wrapping up, probably one of the big questions we're going to be talking about in a lot of areas this year is the impact of falling interest rates. We've already seen treasuries decline. We're looking at the Fed trying to figure out what they're going to do next and possibly looking at that soft landing for the Fed. What is the maybe overall impact for SI performance with rates on the decline?
Yeah, of course. And as Michelle just said, this macro backdrop is really what will guide performance. And last year, really the last 18 months of increasing interest rates has been challenged, in particular for those solution providers that are sustainable investments, or perhaps even just broadly some of the thematic investments aligned to things like green technologies, right, renewable energy, electric vehicles. And if you stop and think about it, this makes sense. A lot of the predicted cash flows of these companies are going to come further out in the future. And with higher interest rates, the present value of those cash flows is just lower. So as we have now an outlook of interest rate cuts, right, we expect as of now at least 4 Fed cut rates by the end of this year, and also a soft landing, to your point, Anthony, it means 2 things. One, it means first more business certainty. So in a world of uncertainty, perhaps this can imply additional confidence in business investment in these areas. And number 2, it also means that an outlook of decreasing interest rates could help those valuations and then therefore help performance for a lot of these areas that have really been depressed over 2023. Now, I'll add a final thing. We're talking a lot from the thematic perspective. Sustainable investing is not just themes. One of the areas that we've also been talking about as broadly CIO is that we like quality. Now, when we look at broadly sustainable companies that manage energy efficiency, human capital, governance, those companies tend to correlate highly with the quality factor. So another way of thinking about investing currently and constructing your portfolio is to balance some of these longer-term kind of thematic investments with these sustainability leader companies in a way to kind of hedge all of these different scenarios and also express your sustainability views.
Great. Amantia, thank you very much. I wish we had more time because this conversation is so broad and we can really get into the weeds, but I really appreciate you both coming by to give us some perspective. I know we're going to be talking a lot about this year. Good to see you both. And thank you for joining us. For more information, visit our website at ubs.com/views. Plus, you can check us out on all the social media channels. Information right there on your screen coming up for you. And don't forget to talk to your financial advisor if you have any questions regarding this conversation that we had today. In the meantime, until next time we meet, I'm Anthony Pastor. Pastore. Have a great day, everyone. And remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. See you soon.